Hello, Curran here. Let's scaffold VZCode. VZCode is a new open source project that I just created. The idea is that it will be a multiplayer code editor system. It will be tailored for editing JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and Markdown. It will support real-time collaboration. So you could invite collaborators over your local area network or use an HTTP tunneling service like ngrok to invite people to collaborate on your code files at the same time. The focus will be on instant feedback during development, so it should work well with hot reloading. If this project goes well, it could end up as the core component of VizHub, the next generation. It's built on Node.js, Express, ShareDB, JSON1, CodeMirror 6, React, and Vite. It should look like this when it's working. Here's a live demo of something I put together as a prototype for the next generation of VizHub. It lets you switch between files, and it does have working real-time collaboration. This prototype is open source under the VizHub v3 directory. So what I want to do is use that as a reference implementation and pull out just the editor pieces and put that into this brand new project called VZCode. Here's how I'd like it to work for the first iteration. This should be a usable alternative to VSCode and the LiveShare plugin. But I'm thinking this VZCode thing will live in NPM, so developers could enable the VZCode editor on their projects via NPM. Just like we have npm run build and npm run dev in Vite, for example, I'd like to introduce another command like that would be npm run edit. What that would do is start a local server that pops open this code editor in your browser locally. There will be a sidebar panel that lists the files and a code editor panel using CodeMirror. And when you make changes, the server should auto-save those files to disk. That saving would integrate well with the Vite dev server and its hot reloading. And this local server, anyone in your local network could connect to it. And then whoever is connected, the code edits would be synchronized across multiple clients using operational transform. And this is where JSON1 and ShareDB come in. So that's the overall idea. Here's where the code stands today. There's really not much here yet, but in package.json, I've grabbed the name VZCode on npm and developed a little test script. So if you run npm test, it does cd test, which is this directory here that just has a sample file that we would want to pull up in the editor. And then it runs node cli.js. This file defines the command line interface. So the idea is you would run npm run edit. It would start this script and start the server. And so far, all it does is console.log, welcome to VZCode, and this is just the hello world for Express. It just serves hello world at the root directory. So there's a lot to do now. There is a Kanban board where I'm tracking all this stuff. Adopt ShareDB, adopt Vite, adopt Prettier for the code formatting. This is one of my all-time favorite tools. You know, I might do that first because that's very low-hanging fruit just to get some momentum. For that, I would just want to do npm install -s or -d rather, Prettier, and then in package.json, I do want to introduce a Prettier script that will just format all of our code. And I've solved this problem before of coming up with a script that will just run Prettier on all the files. So I'll just use that. Now I can say npm run Prettier and it will format the files. Oh, but we should add a .prettier ignore to ignore these things. So in Prettier ignore, we want to ignore .get ignore and all the swap files that are created by Vim. as temporary files. Let's try Prettier again. And of course, we need to add Prettier ignore to Prettier ignore. It's a classic. Okay, that's done. Now we've got this Prettier command. Sweet. I'll make a commit. Adopt Prettier closes number 7. This will automatically close the GitHub issue. And I'm just going to push it straight to main because it's just me right now. But in the future, I'll do pull requests for sure. All right, adopt Prettier is done. Now let's adopt ShareDB. Why not? This involves adding ShareDB as a dependency and listening over WebSockets for those real-time synchronization messages. And here's a reference implementation we can draw from. Yeah, this is the server of this VZCode mirror package, which is a standalone code editor with real-time collaboration, but without the ability to navigate between files. This is exactly what we need. I'm going to copy all of these imports and paste them in our CLI code. And then we need to install these as dependencies with npm install ShareDB OT-JSON1, which is the latest and greatest implementation of operational transformation, which was originally invented for collaborative editing of plain text documents. Just a little context, JSON1 is a project by Joseph Gentle, who also created JSON0 many years ago, which ships by default with ShareDB. But JSON1 is way better than JSON0 for a lot of reasons. So that's what we're going to use. So let's install these packages and save them to our package.json. Oh, we need a couple more. WS, WebSockets. This is the WebSocket server, a very popular package on NPM. And lastly, this WebSocket JSON stream. Yeah, this is like an adapter for WebSockets that makes it into a Node.js stream. So we need this to use WebSockets with ShareDB. This is an active fork of the original implementation from 6 years ago. All right, so we install all this stuff, and let's copy over the rest of the code. Okay, we have to register the JSON1 OT type with ShareDB. This is something I figured out after a lot of trial and error. Okay, we set up the port, create the app. We already have that. Then we create the ShareDB backend. There it is. Then we create the ShareDB connection. And then we create the HTTP server. And this might be in conflict with the pattern we're using here. So let's just keep that in mind. I'll put that there. Server is http.createServer, and we pass in our Express app. And see, down here, it's server.listen rather than app.listen. So let's make that change. Instead of app.listen, it's server.listen. And then what's next? Our WebSocket server. Here it is. And that one needs access to our HTTP server. In this example, we are serving static files, but let's cross that bridge when we get there. We don't have any static files to serve as of yet. Next is listening for connections on the WebSocket server. What this does is listens for connections over WebSockets and then essentially integrates that with ShareDB. And then here's some code that creates the initial document. So in ShareDB, a document is a thing. You can think of it as a JavaScript object with keys and values. And when those values change, those changes can be broadcast between clients and synchronized in real time. So our document here is going to represent the files on the file system that we want to be able to edit. So I'll bring in that code and then use Prettier to format everything. So ShareDB is based on this notion of collections and documents. It's a lot like MongoDB and you can actually run ShareDB on top of MongoDB. But we're not going to do that here. We're just going to run it in memory, so there won't be any persistent database that stores these documents. But it's up to us what we want to name the collection. Doesn't really matter, since it's all in memory. But we have to name it something, so I'll say documents. And also, since there's just one of these and it's just in memory, the document ID doesn't matter either. So I guess I'll just say 1. Now let's think about the content that we want to have in this document, like the structure of it. I've been thinking about this problem for a while with regard to how VizHub does it, how VizHub works. And I've come to the conclusion that the best way to represent a collection of files for the purposes of OT, operational transformation, is to not use the file name as the key, but rather use some kind of a unique ID as the key for the file. That way, if the name of the file changes, the OT operations don't really have to do that much because it'll retain the same ID and it will be robust to renames. If we use the file name as the key in our representation of files, then the OT can get buggy real fast because you need to handle all sorts of cases of like, okay, when the name changes, you're actually removing that key and then adding a new key. So it just makes it a lot simpler to deal with from the OT perspective. And since all we want to do is track files, we don't even need these outer levels of this data structure, content and files. That was for some other context. So let's create a document that has this random number as the key. The text of the file is const foo equals bar, but let's give this file a name too, like index.js maybe, and that'll be the name. And eventually, we're going to want to populate this based on looking at the file system, but we're not quite there yet. But let me add a little to-do. Figure out how to list files on disk with Node.js, and then use that list to populate the files in our document. But anyway, this is enough for now. I feel like I have adopted ShareDB. I think that's enough. I mean, we don't have any front end yet, so we can't really test this yet. But this is roughly the scope I had imagined with this issue here, adopt ShareDB. So I think I'll make a commit. I'll do a pull request this time just to show you how that goes. Actually, I should probably run it just to see if it breaks or anything. Okay, it started up. That's about all that we can do with it now. And it says hello world. Okay, great. It didn't crash. That's all I wanted to check, really. All right, sweet. So I'll make a new branch. I'll call it adopt ShareDB. I'll do a git status just to check what files have changed. Oh, there's a question mark. So that means I need to do git add dot, otherwise that dot prettier ignore file would not be tracked in git. Now if we do a git status, it says, okay, everything's been staged for the commit. So I'll make a commit. Adopt ShareDB. Closes number, what is this? Number 6. All right, that should do it. Then I'll do a git push and then copy paste this command and then click this link to make the pull request. All right, here we go. Create pull request. Now in here you can see what files have changed in this really nice diff view. Okay, great, we created the pull request. I also want to track this new piece of work that has come out of this, which is listing files on disk. See, when we spin up this editor, it should show a sidebar with which files? In our case, it's going to go into the test directory. So we should see a sidebar with index.js because that's here in the test directory. And when we run npm test, it does cd test and then starts our server. So based on the current working directory of our server, we should do essentially like an ls Unix command, but with Node.js, and then get that list. And that list will populate ultimately the sidebar, but that will be derived from our ShareDB document right here. So the name will be index.js, but this name, instead of being hard-coded, should come from the result of querying the file system for the list of files. Yeah, so that's all scoped to a new issue. List files on disk. Okay, this Kanban UI is a bit new to me. So this is a draft. I want to convert it to an issue on VZCode. Okay, great. Now it's an issue. So I will edit this issue to add more detail. And I'll just copy this stuff here. Figure out how to list files on disk with Node.js. Use that list to populate the files in our ShareDB document. Okay, we have started scaffolding via VZCode. I hope to make more videos like this as the project progresses.